This is a very special book. This is an old book, too. This has been around for a long time. Called The Bear and Mr. Bear. It's by Francis Thomas. Listen to the words of this book. I usually do this for fourth, fifth, and even sixth grade. I usually ask them, I want you to listen to a very different book called The Bear and Mr. Bear. And when we're done, while I'm reading the book, I want you to think of how this book makes you feel. And then I want you to give me some adjectives. I want you to give me some words that best describes the book. Because I'm going to ask you, what do you think that book was really about? And it's up to you to bring me those adjectives, okay? Let's listen to The Bear and Mr. Bear. Although he must have had another name, real name, everyone in the village called him Mr. Bear. Grumpy and cross, shaggy and unsmiling, the old man never spoke a word more than necessary. In the streets, children stuck out their tongues behind his back. He didn't seem to notice. Once, long ago, Mr. Bear had been as friendly as anybody. Sad things had happened to him. He had forgotten how to be happy. For many years, the old man lived all alone in a big house on a hill. Behind the house was a large garden, and around it, a high wall. Inside the house, Mr. Bear grew older and crosser. One day, Mr. Bear had an errand to do in town. He meant to come and go as quickly as he could, but it was a carnival day, and the crowds of people pushed him this way and that. Soon he found himself in the town square, where there were jugglers and candy sellers and even a noisy carousel. And at the carnival was a red-haired man who held a stick and a chain. At the end of the chain was a bear with a ring through his nose and shackles on his back paws. A muzzle kept his mouth shut. The bear was smelly. His coat was matted. His eyes were dull and runny. And when the trainer poked him with a stick, the bear stood on his hind legs. The man poked again, and the bear jumped faster and faster, lumbering from one foot to the other. He appeared to be dancing, and all the people laughed and clapped. But Mr. Bear saw that the bear did not dance for joy. He looked hard at the bear, but the bear looked right past him with sad, dull eyes. "Dance!" shouted the red-haired man. And the bear danced, and the people clapped. Mr. Bear pushed his way through the crowd, looking neither left nor right. "Cross as a bear," the people muttered as he passed. He left the square and the town and went slowly up the hill to his big house. And that night, Mr. Bear couldn't sleep. He didn't think of the jugglers or the carousel, but he remembered the bear with the sad, dull eyes. He sat up in bed. His brow was furrowed. He suddenly had an idea. So very early the next morning, Mr. Bear readied his horse and wagon and set off for town. Almost no one was in the streets except for the sweeper and the baker, who was yawning as he opened his shop. The wagons, the tents, the candy sellers, and the carousel were all gone. Mr. Bear saw a young girl carrying water, and he asked, "Which way did the carnival go?" "That way," she replied, pointing. Mr. Bear didn't thank her. He clucked his tongue to the horses, and the wagon pulled away. "Cross as a bear," the little girl thought, and she shook her head. Mr. Bear left town. The sun rose in the sky, and the road was wide and dusty. And at midday, he found what he was looking for. The red-haired man was sitting by the side of the road eating a sausage. The man's horse was eating grass. And there, in a cage, slumped the dirty old bear, eating nothing at all. "I've come to buy your bear," said Mr. Bear. The man just laughed and took another bite of sausage. Mr. Bear took out his purse and showed him a gold piece. And the man said, "Look, the bear's not for sale." Mr. Bear showed him another gold piece and another, and finally the man yawned and said, "Oh, well, I've had enough of bears anyway. They're too cross. I'll stick to juggling in the future." The man took the gold pieces, and he and Mr. Bear lifted the creaking wooden cage under the wagon. The bear growled. Mr. Bear took some apples from his bag and fed them to the bear. The journey home was long and bumpy, and whenever the bear would growl, Mr. Bear would give him another apple. In this way, they made their way home. By the time they got there, it was nearly dark. That night, the bear slept soundly in Mr. Bear's woods. The bear had given him a sleeping potion mixed in a bowl of water. And while the bear slept, Mr. Bear removed the shackles and the muzzle. He took off the chain. He chopped up that cage and burned it. Meanwhile, the bear dreamed. He dreamed of times long ago, of playing in the hills with his mother, his sisters, and brothers. The bear dreamed of splashing in a silvery stream and catching a fish. He dreamed of rolling in soft grass and sniffing for ripe berries. Then he dreamed of how the hunters had come with their guns. They had shot his mother and had taken all the cubs to a town and sold them. And when the bear remembered this, he woke with an angry growl. He opened his mouth wide and yawned. He lifted his head and stretched, and there was no chain to jerk him back to the ground, and no cold, slippery cage, only soft, sweet grass. The bear stood up unsteadily. He could smell the delicious scent of fresh water. The bear took one step and another. Still no chain jerked his head. Nobody shouted or waved a stick. Into the stream he lumbered, slowly at first, then plunging in right up to his shoulders. Cold water ran over his dry, matted fur and down his burning throat. When the bear shook himself all over, he remembered how hungry he was. Across the garden, sitting quietly on the grass, was a man who had given him some apples. Now there was more food, honeycomb and nuts, fresh fish and berries. The bear ate everything. He had not eaten such good food for a long time and was just beginning, not to feel cross or frightened. The bear looked at Mr. Bear, who looked back, and Mr. Bear smiled. I usually ask the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, it's a nice book. Is it just a book about an old man, an angry man, and an old bear? Or is there something more here? It's amazing the number of adjectives they come up with about just using one word of what this book is about. I keep waiting for the right word until somebody says freedom, or love, or caring, or compassion. And those are the adjectives that describe this beautiful book. If you like what we're doing, please subscribe. You just might find a very special book that will change your whole life. Thank you. Bye-bye.